Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Amy.
Our project is called Mind, Body, and Soul, the Nature of Well-Being, and this podcast is just one small piece of the overall project. We are making a documentary that follows our hike on the Continental Divide Trail that will explore how spending time in nature affects a person's mental, physical, and spiritual well-being.
We are guinea pigs in a sense because we will be documenting our own experiences and recording changes that we find. Along the way, we are interviewing people about their experiences in nature to see how they have been affected.
Much of the benefits that come from being in nature are subjective, and therefore hard to measure in a quantifiable way. That's why we have turned to recording stories as a way to distribute this knowledge. Since the beginning of human culture, we have compressed valuable information into stories, and that's how we have shared wisdom throughout the generations.
We hope that the stories we gathered during this project will help spread some of the wisdom that can be found in the wilderness. Episode 22, Part 3 of 3, the final chapter with Zen hermit monk Robin Henderson. Welcome to the final part of our 3-part conversation with Robin. If you've been following along, you already know how deep and powerful his story is. In this last installment, we continue exploring Robin's reflections on solitude, spiritual practice, and his time spent living off-grid. It's a thoughtful wrap-up to a truly unique and inspiring journey. To learn more about Robin, we will have a link in the description where you can find his blog.
Zooming out now, how do you think Zen is how does it mesh with American society, and what do people think of it? Is there any kind of future there?
I think there's a tremendous future there. The first thing that needs to be said is that Western Zen is much different from the Zen of Asia. And that's been true from the beginning. And within Western Zen, there's a lot of tension over that fact. There are people who want it to be very Japanese, or very Korean, or very Vietnamese, which I view as a ridiculous ambition, because we're not those things. And Zen tells you that you're not supposed to try to be something else. And even some of the great Asian teachers who visited the West, who visited our Zen centers, have told us, don't do this. Stop doing this Japanese stuff. Japanese stuff is my thing. I go home, my people do Japanese stuff, but look at me, I'm Japanese. You're not. And still there are people in Western Zen that are trying to be Japanese, and that kind of drives me crazy. But we have brought in the West things to Zen that Zen has needed for a long time. If it's true that we've also misunderstood some things, which I think we have, world Zen needed the West. It needed us to come in without Asian culture behind us, because a lot of what happens in Asian culture isn't Zen at all. It's Japaneseism, it's Koreanism, it's Vietnameseism. They've done the same thing to Buddhism that we've done to Christianity. They've turned it into something that's from our culture and not something that's independent of our culture. So we end up doing lots of things. A classic example in Christianity is the obsession with sex, especially in America. Sex is like 97% of Christianity, but if you've read the man's book, you know that sex plays a very small role in Christianity. And in times past and in other cultures, people were not nearly as obsessed with all things sex as the American church is, Well, in Japan, there's the obsession with authority. Now, we see that immediately, because as people in the West, we have a knotty relationship with authority. Especially Americans do not like to be told what to do, Japanese people love that. They get unhappy if they don't have somebody telling them what to do. So what do they define Zen as? Utter obedience to your teacher. Teachers that are not mentioned either in the Buddhist sutras, and although they're mentioned in the Zen sutras, they're most often called down. The teacher's often played for a fool in the Zen tradition, and that's important. It's understanding the humanity of the teacher. But the Japanese, in Japanese monasteries, when the master is away, the elder students, as an elder student, this is hard for me to believe, but I'm from the West. The elder students abuse their inferiors. They do things like take their food away from them and not let them take baths and just things that are designed to mess with them, because they're elder students. They don't have a superior on deck right now to stop them, so that's what they do. There's a very funny story in a book called The Two Shores of Zen, which was written by an American Zenner who sat in a Japanese monastery, where the master left and these elder students started this reign of terror, doing things like making them scrub the floor back and forth 72 times, long after it was clean. They're just messing with you, And they came in, and he had a little device that heats water for tea. And in the monastery, in theory, you're not supposed to have any device like that in your room. In Japanese monasteries, there are 4 monks to a room. And the elder students came in there and took this away from them while he wasn't in the room. And he came back and wanted to brew some tea. And he said, where's my tea maker? And his brothers told him that the elder students came and took it. And he said, oh, really? And he turned around and he marched into their living space where they were using it and unplugged it and took it back to his room, just like that. Now, a Japanese person would never do that. And he said they were so terrified to see him do this, and he's a foreigner anyway, and the Japanese all know that foreigners are a little crazy anyway. Foreigner, white guy, round eye, walked in here and took this back and just marched back out with it. They didn't address a word to him again. They didn't come back and try to steal it back again. They didn't complain to the master. It just never happened. Okay, and that's because in Japan you have a very authoritarian society, so authoritarianism becomes the soul of Buddhism. We needed Western Zen, and our secular Buddhists, I talked earlier about how their path is not my path, but we needed secular Buddhists to come in and say, yeah, teachers, gurus, no. And by the way, transmigration, what Americans call reincarnation, that doesn't happen either. Forget that. We don't cure warts. All that stuff you've heard about, we can put a wet blanket on and then meditate our body temperatures up and dry the blanket. Bullshit. Zen needed this. It really needed this. So, yeah, I think both Zen in the West, as a thing that's Western, has a tremendous future, and I think we are a very important part of the world Zen movement. We're balancing a lot of Asian hammer-headedness that needed to be balanced.
Do you see any of this stuff kind of integrating more into mainstream society?
I think it already has to a large extent. There's even some conversation about whether or not some of the secularization of Zen in the West is bad for Zen. Zen has become really common in the counseling professions. It's become very present in psychology and when you're therapy, when you're helping people that have issues. And that's fine. I mean, I'm the poster boy for Zen healing a lot of mental anguish and other unpleasantness, but there's a fear that Zen will stop being a religion and become a therapy method, because there's so much interpollination with that now. There's also, again, I mentioned sex earlier. Guess what? American Zen is obsessed with sex. The Zen in no other nation is obsessed with sex, or no other part of the world, but in the West, and especially in the United States, all these sex scandals in the monasteries, and people are upset that the students are possibly having sex, and it's like, people. Sex is human. I mean, abuse is bad. Abuse is bad, whether it's sexual or not. All abuse is bad. But sex is not abuse by its very nature. But Americans are convinced that it is. And that's becoming part of Western Zen. I've often said when I get into arguments with my fellow Zenners, I say, if you're going to do Zen the same way you did the church, go back to the church. We don't need another church. The last thing America needs is one more church. Well, what we need is the church, and we need Zen. It's important that our Zen perspective remain intact. And one of those things is not being effectively mentally ill about all issues that involve sex. I mean, even sexual abuse in this country, the way that we respond to it, I don't think is healthy. And I lived in France for quite some time. And the French, I think, have a much healthier view of sexuality. And I've always wanted to do a study. I'm never going to get to do this, but I've always wanted to do a study where I study the way that abuse victims are treated in France. By treated, I mean medically. And the way that they're medically treated here in the United States, and see if there's any difference in the rate of success. Because I would bet you good money that in France, people that have suffered terrible sexual abuse have a much better rate and level of recovery than they have here. Because in France, they get told, this is a terrible thing that happened to you, but it's over now and you can move on. In the United States, in American culture, we have this occult view that sex changes you somehow. So if you get sexually abused, the culture is telling you, maybe not your therapist, but the culture is telling you, you'll never heal. Something has been taken from you that you can never get back. That's not only not true, it's dangerous. It's a dangerous attitude. And when I see that kind of perspective start to leak into Zen, I become very uncomfortable, because you can recover, and sex is not in and of itself a weapon. It's something that can be weaponized. But if two students are having an affair, the same guy who wrote the book, The Two Shores of Zen, which I heartily recommend, it's a wonderful book. Speaking of a book that should have been picked up by a large publisher and should be well known now, and he couldn't get anybody to publish his book, he had to self-publish. He's a monk. He's a monastery monk down in San Francisco, the San Francisco Zen Center, the Vatican of Western Zen. Anyway, he tells stories about the goings-on in his monastery in Japan, where this was going on, and he even kind of got sucked into a little bit of himself. And it's an authoritarian culture over there, but nobody really wigged out about it. In the end, it was just sex. You're not supposed to have sex. You're especially not supposed to have sex in the monastery. But if it happens, welcome to humanity. And I would like to see more of that attitude stay intact as Zen moves west. Because I think in the West we need perspective on that and a few other kind of bugbears that we have in our culture. Just as the Japanese need to learn to mellow out on the militarism and the rank and the conformity, they need to hear us say, that's not what the book says. We need to hear them also tell us what the book doesn't say.
I guess it's a perfect way of saying that nobody has it all figured out.
No.
And you got to kind of take bits and pieces from what you think the right answers are, I guess.
I read a teaching by a Chan master. Chan is the Zen of China. It was the original Zen. All of the other names for Zen in the other countries, like Zen, is a mispronunciation of the Chinese word Chan. It's called Zhang in Korea, and I can't remember what the Vietnamese call it. Anyway, he's a Chan master, and he was talking about the various denominations of Zen. And big surprise, we do war with each other. The different denominations of Zen are always pointing their fingers at each other and saying, you're doing it wrong. And he was talking about this, and he says, yes, there are many, many schools of Zen, because that's as many schools as are required. And I thought, thank you for saying that. People are different. Different people need a different Zen. And I'd go further and say, there's many, many schools of Zen that we need that we don't have yet. There's going to, hopefully at some point in the future, if we survive this crisis that's rolling down on us, maybe every person will be their own school of Zen at that point. And that'll be as many schools as we need.
That was something that I wanted to talk about, is I think seems like that's kind of what you did out there on that 100 days, is you kind of almost reinvented what this is for you.
Yeah.
And you went down to the very base level.
Yeah.
And kind of built back up from there.
I built a monastery. I built a monastery of one. I almost got trampled by a herd of elk.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're in the coyotes. It seems like you had some relationship with them too.
Yes, I had an ongoing relationship with the coyotes, and I got dysentery. That was a thing I told you that I was afraid was going to drive me off, and I had to cure that myself. That's where my herbalist background came in.
The thing that I'm most interested in is like, how does nature specifically play a role in basically all of your experiences out there, and like why was it kind of necessary to be in nature rather than other things?
It was necessary first and foremost to get away from people, to get away from humans. We talked about how distracting that is. I needed to get away from criticism, because constant criticism is what we humans do, and it's not good. And I needed to be in a place where people weren't coming in and telling me I wasn't sitting straight enough, like happens in the monastery, or I wasn't bowing deeply enough, or I wasn't wearing my robe right, or all this stuff. I needed to be in a place where those things weren't happening, where I could just deal with what in Zen is called the great concern. I was dealing with the great concern. And so that was one thing, just to get away from people. That was the negative thing, the negative part, the negativity, getting away from people. But the positive thing was to be in the presence of the outback, to have an example around me of, again, a Zen term, the great mind. The great mind is as close as Zen has ever come to saying God, and it means the way that the universe works. And it's in front of you all the time, so that it was my teacher. That was the example in front of me all the time of what reality is. And so it would kind of keep me from getting distracted by these illusions and delusions that are just part and parcel of our human lives, of our social lives.
Did you ever feel like you got in touch with something beyond the physical realm, some sort of spiritual presence or anything like that?
What happened was there stopped being a physical realm. There stopped being a difference. Out there, from all the meditation and being in nature, it really is true that there aren't any divisions between anything in this universe, where the scientists keep making the particles smaller and smaller and smaller. First it was molecules, and it was atoms, and it was electrons and neutrons, and now that it's like quarks, and they keep making it smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like the famous story is turtles all the way down, and it really is so that nothing really exists. Everything is temporary. And as reluctant as I am to talk that way, because I'm old enough to remember when the baby boomers were in their hip phase, and that got kind of annoying. But some of these things are facts, and they need to be said. This table is not here. This is a conglomeration of smaller bits that have just agreed for various reasons to come together and be this table temporarily. If our lives weren't so short, if we were beings who lived 10,000 years, we would literally watch this crumble before our eyes. The only reason it even seems to be here now is because we live such short lives that we won't be around to see it stop being wood. But it wasn't wood before it was wood, and it's not going to be wood when it's done. And you and I are exactly the same, and everything is like that. Not just on Earth, but that planet I talked about that's 1 billion light years away wasn't a planet before it was a planet. It's in the process of becoming something that's not a planet now. We're all like that. And that is what really came home to me out there, was the temporary nature of existence, the recombining that's going on all the time. And this is part of that great gift I was given of the knowledge of my fundamental unimportance. Thank God for that, That is the most wonderful thing. I cannot do enough damage in this world to really hurt anything. I'm not going to go out there and do it. I'm still going to try not to damage. But, there's a reason why people I've never met don't care about me. I'm just not important. I'm just not important. Some people find that really disturbing. I know Christians who say that they're really heartened by that notion that God knows them and takes care of them personally and listens to their prayers and stuff. And that's them, that's their path. For me, though, what I really like best is that God doesn't even know I'm here, speaking of life forms that last forever, I haven't been alive long enough for him to even know I'm here. That'll be the case by the time I'm dead. He probably has no reason to know I'm here at all. And that really makes me feel at ease. It just doesn't matter. And the strange thing about that is it's energizing. Once you realize it just doesn't matter, you're ready to go out and do stuff. You're ready to go out and matter.
It's a really interesting, like, kind of paradox.
Yeah.
Or side effect. Because I can see how, when you say stuff like that, that would freak a lot of people out. I don't matter? Like, what do I do? Don't people care about me?
Right.
That would be very scary.
Well, another Zen quotation from the masters are matter, no matter, same thing. And you could say that anyway. You could say live, dead, same thing. Up, down, same thing. Hot, cold, same thing. And that is all essentially true. One of the great strengths of Zen as a religion is that unlike some other religions that are threatened by science, the further science goes, the more it proves what we've always been saying anyway, which I love. I mean, it was science that figured out that this isn't here, that none of this is here. And but the Buddha didn't know any of that. He didn't know anything about atom theory, but he just observed what was going on around him and made these conclusions. And the same thing is true of, like, hot and cold are not things. If you have any background in physics, you know that it has to do with how fast the molecules are moving and all these other kind of things. There's heat in a bathtub full of cold water. We don't see it that way because when we get in, it's freezing. But there's heat in there. You can pump the heat out of cold air. People are heating their houses that way now with heat pumps. It's 40 below outside and that thing's pumping heat into the house from the air outside, And Zen has always been saying that. The ancient Zen ancestors, all of their teachings were essentially that. Don't confront cold as cold. It isn't cold. You're in a cold place. That's not the same thing as this being cold, And you get back to, like, some of the emotional issues, certainly that I've had. It's kind of the same deal. The whole world isn't sad. I'm sad. And for me, that's very liberating. If I just stop being sad, I can decide, well, I just won't be sad about this. It doesn't go away. But to realize that the world is not a terrible place when my life is terrible is really liberating for me. I've overcome envy. I always wanted to meet that woman that I'd marry and be married to the rest of my life and have children. And since I was 4, that was my great desire. And I so badly wanted to be the best boyfriend in the world and the best husband in the world. And you know what happens when you do that? You suck. I was terrible. So anyway, I used to be really envious of people who have those relationships. They just seem to really gel and they're happy together. I'm not envious of them anymore. I am happy. I am glad that those people are out there doing that. I feel happier when I walk past them and see them. My friends that are in those kind of marriages, I really love it. And like anything else in life, there's always the negative dark side, because when they get divorced, I go, no, no. That's the whole empath thing. A couple of years ago, I posted on Facebook, I said, because some dear friends of mine had decided to get divorced, and I went online and I said, listen, I want all my friends to hear me say this. Stop getting divorced. You never consider the effect it will have on me. And I have great friends who came in and left wonderful comments as a result of that. But anyway.
Did you ever have anything out there that would qualify as a religious experience?
Oh yeah, yeah. It happened. It happened a lot out there. One epiphany that I had was I climbed the mountain across the river from mine, which was highest, and looked down at the land that I was living on, and it was such an amazing sense of love and gratitude. I did that shortly before I left, about a week before I left. Climbed all the way to the top of that mountain, looked down, and I just was moved to tears by that. And the gratitude that I felt out there was new for me, to feel so grateful for even little things. I told you about breaking my mirror and feeling gratitude for what my mirror had given me. I had so much emotional lability out there. Is that a term that you're familiar with, emotional lability?
Not really.
It means that your emotions are always close to the surface, that I could be moved to tears by things like a flowering tree. By the time I left, a flowering tree was so beautiful that I just stood there, and it was too beautiful for words. And that all receded as I came back into the world and got kind of numb again. But while I was out there, I just received a kind of a joy that wasn't even a joy. It's just more of a kind of a hum of just the wonderfulness of that flowering tree, or whatever it might be. You know, my last day on the mountain, I spent the entire day thanking everything. I got up early in the morning. I had my zanola. It's a breakfast cereal that I invented out there that I call zanola, which is basically oatmeal, dried fruit, and nuts. And that's what I ate every morning for breakfast. It's got powdered milk in there too. Put some water on it and eat it. And I had my morning zanola and tea. And then it was my busiest day. The whole day out there was my last, or the whole time out there was my last day, because it was 87 acres I was sitting on, and I had to tour the entire 87 acres and thank everything. And it wasn't kind of a silly little thing I was doing. It was something that I was called to do. I wanted to do this. And I walked the whole grounds, and I thanked all the trees, and I thanked the bushes, I thanked the animals and the birds that I saw. And as tacky as that sounds, it was very sincere for me while I was doing it. I thanked the barn. I thanked my tent. I thanked my broken mirror again. I thanked my bowls. I thanked my robe. I started thanking my hands and my feet. You know, I thanked everything that I encountered, and I literally did that all day long until it got too dark. You know, breaking to eat, of course. When it got so dark, I couldn't be walking around in the woods thinking things. I went to bed, and my feet were wrecked from all the walking I'd done in sandals, always in sandals. All the walking that I'd done in sandals. I grew up in the woods, but let me tell you, you don't know the woods until you're walking around out here off trail in sandals. You become very mindful. It's very good for mindfulness practice. But my feet were just wrecked, torn up by brambles and everything else, rubbing on the sandals. And I remember laying down and just thinking, right, I did it today. I did it. You know, it was such a sense of accomplishment, which is hard to explain to others, but such a sense of accomplishment to go around and tell everything that had been so important to me, how important it had been to me, and to bow properly, like monks bow to one another, and to freaking mean it too. I was really glad nobody could see me. I was really glad for that, but I wouldn't have done it if people were looking, but I was very happy to do it.
What did you call that? Emotional ability?
Emotional lability.
Lability.
Yeah, I've always had it a little bit, and some of the mental, psychological damage that I incurred, it's one of the symptoms, which is why we keep coming up with these old references that you're too young to get. But have you ever heard anybody refer to long distance commercials? Back in my day when we had long distance on the telephone, you had to pay a lot of money for it. The phone company was always running TV ads to try to convince you to make long distance ads, and they were always tear jerkers. They were always trying to make you think about that grandmother that you have in New York that you haven't talked to. So there was always like the grandmother was sitting in a rocking chair lonely, and the phone would ring and she would call and it's you, and she'd talk to you. And that used to be the test of what a wimp you were if you teared up at long distance commercials. And I used to tell people, even when I was in high school, I'd say, long distance commercials, I cry over toilet paper commercials. I mean, and if he's squeezing the shaman, please, you know, and that's always been me. And then it got worse as I incurred some of this damage. So, and when I was out there, it was a constant fact, crying and laughing and crying and laughing, and I just loved everything, and I was moved to tears by everything, and I didn't mind. as long as there weren't people looking, because I really did feel that I was experiencing a reality that is very real that we usually aren't experiencing. And in this case, it's humanity that dampens our emotional lives. Emotional lives are problematic for other people, so we learn to kind of, some cultures are worse than others, but I mean, this goes back to the Japanese, where women aren't even allowed to laugh out loud. They have to cover their mouths when they laugh, We're not that bad in America, but if we're men especially, we still have this pressure to act like Mr. Spock. And when I was out there, you do know who Mr. Spock was, don't you?
No.
Oh, liar, you're lying. But anyway, yeah, so I enjoyed that out there. I that was a great gift that I got, was the ability to be moved to tears or to just love the hell out of a millipede, That's why that's what I mean when I say if I can still be out there doing this all the time, and you guys would never see me again. I'd just be gone and do that.
I'm interested in that because I think I've experienced periods of that they only last for maybe hours at a time, but where emotions are like extremely readily available. Okay.
There's a word for that in Zen. It's called kensho, and what I was experiencing was kensho.
Okay.
The kensho is usually brief and fleeting, but out there, after 100 days of meditating, I just kind of lived in. I didn't necessarily live in a state of kensho, but it came quick and often. That's the point.
Okay.
It came quick and often, whereas in the world of humanity, you have to meditate a good long time to get in that place.
Yeah. The most recent time was when we decided to quit the CDT, and it was kind of an abrupt decision because we were changing plans like every day, so every day was kind of unsure, not knowing what we were going to do. And then when we decided to quit, it was very abrupt. And I had never had time to kind of get used to the idea that we were done right now and get up out of the trail and everything.
Yeah.
And I cried for probably half an hour, like probably some of the most intense emotions that I've felt in a long time.
Yeah.
And it really came as a surprise to me because I couldn't control it.
Yeah. When I've been outdoors, and when I was young, I did a lot of hiking, long distance hiking too. What I've noticed is that my self-esteem comes way up when I'm outdoors, and I'm quite happy to be me, quite proud of whatever it is that I'm doing, and then I'm sure that you've had this experience. Many times I've had this where I've been out in the outback forever, and then you come back down into a town to buy something or something, and on the mountain, you're a mountain guy. You come into town and you're dirty and you're unshaven and your hair is too long and everything you own is worn and you're just a bum, and you feel like that all of a sudden. Whereas the same person a couple hours ago in the woods was Mr. Capable. And you come to town and you're afraid the cops are going to arrest you, or run you out of town.
I don't even feel dirty until I get into town.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, most of that emotion just came from it almost felt like I was breaking up with the trail or nature or something. It became this being to me, and realizing that I wasn't going to be out there all day every day anymore was sad.
Yeah.
It just took me some time to kind of accept that and come to terms with it.
Yeah, I always miss it when I leave it too. I definitely feel on some elemental level like this is my home. And when I'm not here, I'm not necessarily miserable, but I'm not home. And when I go back to the outback, I always feel like it's my home. When I've lived in other countries where the outback is terribly different, that's always been a blow for me because I grew up waist deep in Salal. I know the names of all the plants. I know what you can do with most of them. When I lived in the outback in France, I lived in a rural area along the Mediterranean there, miles and miles of nothing. I didn't know anything out there. The rocks were the wrong color. Everything was wrong. And of course what I did was I threw myself into it and started to learn again, which is really cool. And then you miss that. But for a country boy, there just isn't greater lost than when you're in a place where you don't know the names of the plants and you can't predict the weather. And that was my first experience with that. I'd never lived for a long time in a place that was utterly different from the outback that I grew up in. So that was my first sense of real alienation, because the people were different. French culture is very different, but I've always felt kind of alienated from people anyway. So that wasn't tremendously bad. But what was initially a blow was to hike for hours and days at a time in this place where I did not feel capable, because I didn't know the names of anything. I didn't know what you do with this plant, or what this plant or this snake or this animal might do to you. And
Another thing I wanted to get back to was the story about the doll and the teacher pulling pieces off the doll and then saying, "What is the doll?"
Yeah.
And kind of our obsession with needing to like categorize things.
Yeah.
And I find that in society, things are much more highly categorized, and everything has its little slot. But in nature, it's all just kind of like a jumble. Everything's all together as one piece.
Right. That's right. It's all one thing. It's all something that was something else a while ago and will be something else again, and it's in a constant, evident state of change. You can just watch the seasons change. I was out there for 100 days, and in 100 days I saw a lot of seasonal changes. Just on the corner of my meditation shelter, the plants had been bare when I got there because it was spring. They'd leafed out, the leaves had turned, and were starting to drop by the time that I left. And it happened right there next to my knee, where I was meditating every day. And yeah, that's definitely true. And you talk about putting things into categories. That's a big thing when it comes to eremitical monasticism, because we're not in the category of monk in most people's heads, and people always want to see credentials. Who made you a monk? That's what they want to know. Who made you a monk? Well, I made myself a monk. They don't like to hear that. They want to know the name of the person who made me a monk. They want to see the certificate that makes me a monk. They want to know who is supervising my monk practice, And sometimes I tell them, well, my mother made me a monk. First, she birthed me, and then she literally made my robe. She made the robe that I wear as a monk. So there you go. That's the ordination that you were asking for. But sadly, that doesn't seem to do it. Doesn't seem to do it.
That touches on another thing that I've noticed about being out here, is that you can kind of make yourself into whatever you want.
Yeah.
And like, what do you think that obsession is with people think that you need to go to a school, you need to have a teacher, you need to somebody else needs to make you into something.
Yeah.
Why can't we make ourselves into something?
It's, the impulse isn't fundamentally wrong, because the charlatans are a thing. But my bottom line is I want to know what they're doing with it. If a guy tells you he's a doctor and he's not a doctor, but that's all he does is tell you he's a doctor, okay. But what if he tells you he's a doctor and then he offers to take your appendix out, right? Now I've got a problem. And I think that's how people feel about hermits too. And I would say, if you ever meet somebody who calls himself a hermit but is taking students, I'd go, if you're going to take students, you got to go through the monastery system and have some training in how to do this, and especially have somebody who has the power to make you drop your students if you're not behaving properly. I wouldn't take students. If I found someone foolish enough who wanted to study under me, I would still say, no. Maybe what you want is a monastery, but I'm a hermit. I have enough problems with the karma I've got. I don't need to incur more negative karma from screwing up your life too. Please get away from me. But I mean, if you want to practice with me, that's cool. We can be hermits together, that's awesome. But don't ask me to lead, because nobody knows better than I do what kind of debacle that's going to lead to. I've been leading myself for 60 years now, and let me tell you, you don't want me leading you. But yeah, I mean, the reason why people are a little put off by the notion of hermits is that they're afraid we're going to start teaching religion. And I would say if you meet a hermit who's doing that, that's not good. One hermit to another, I'd say you're not a hermit. I'd say you haven't passed the ordination that I think hermits have to begin with, which is, I don't want to lead anybody anywhere. I don't want to wreck anybody else's life. I wish everybody the very, very best, but I am not an authority on anything. And that is absolutely the truth. I am not an authority on anything. I can't make 2 loaves of bread the same. I bake bread every week. It's part of my monastic practice, and no 2 of them are ever the same. So don't come to me and ask me to bake your bread. And every real hermit is going to say the same thing. I'm convinced that every real hermit, that's hermit ordination. That's hermit ordination. And you know, we've seen guys start cults. Jim Jones, you know, there was every week you see some other cult that's just started by some guy who's not in any religious organization who's telling people, follow me. And I'm saying, don't do that. He's not real if he's asking people to follow him.
There's a part of that to the human nature is that they want that guy to follow.
Yes, absolutely. I want that guy. I would love to have a, you know, if I could find a teacher that we clicked and I felt that I could trust, I could easily see myself going into a monastery. It's not that I hate that idea. Everybody wants that, you know, and it's lonely being a hermit. It's lonely practicing alone. I miss practicing in a group like I did in the monastery. I had such dear friends in there, some of the best people I've ever met in the monastery. One great thing about Zen monasteries, nobody goes into those places because they're happy. There is not one happy person in any Zen monastery in the world. You go there because it's that or jump off a chair. So you're surrounded by all kinds of people who know damn well, you know, that having problems in life is a thing and that you shouldn't be spiritually critical of that. And it's a very warm, you know, accepting kind of environment, as long as you eat all of your food perfectly correctly and you bow right. Yeah.
Teach some discipline, I guess.
Do you want to hear the story about almost getting trampled by an elk?
Yeah, let's hear that.
That's the one exciting thing that happened to me out there. Everything else was kind of just me sitting on a cushion, but I was clearing a trail through, there was a plantation of trees, of young Douglas fir that had been planted by a previous owner of the land and then not thinned. Have you ever seen timberland that's been planted and not thinned?
I don't know.
It's hard. It's very hard even to walk through because the branches all grow like this. So you've got these rows of trees and they're all grown like that, and it's perfectly dark at noon in the middle. There's no vegetation on the ground at all because nothing can grow. It's the eeriest thing. And so while I was there, part of monasticism is working. Working is an important part of Zen practice. While I was there, I offered the guy who owned the land to prune these trees and as much as I could to kind of remedy, because it's a very suffering kind of place. And while I was at it, I decided that I would build a trail by cutting the branches out, and I'd have a trail through this place. Anyway, I was out there it was August, and I was sawing the branches off, and I had this long trail behind me that I'd been working on literally for months. And I heard a sound. And one of the things about being on Ongo that I remember was I was terrified of people. The thought that people might be out there was terrifying. So I heard like a stick crunch, and I instantly dropped to my knees because I thought it was a person, and I could see it was dark back there, but I could see against the sunlight from the edge of this patch, there were shadows moving, and I could hear footsteps. And so it wasn't just one person, I thought, it was like lots of people. And lots of people on private ground, unannounced. You know, I'm thinking, boy, this doesn't smell good. So anyway, as I sat under there, these shadows moved around and around, and suddenly I saw the outline of a head, and I realized, oh, it's the herd. It's the elk herd that have come out of the hot sun under this dark patch of trees. And that was fine, but they were moving around like this and moving up toward me. And so I was about as far away from the lead cow then as I am from you two now. And I didn't know what to do, because I was afraid if I stood up, they'd all go nuts and start running around. They're the size of horses, you know. They'd all get nuts and start running around, and I'd get trampled. And on the other hand, as they kept advancing, they were going to come up against me eventually anyway, and something was going to go wrong. My stick was back behind. I'd hung my stick up. Even my freaking jackknife, everything that I had that I might have used to defend myself in any way, my robe was hanging on the same tree back behind me. So I sat there and I thought, well, great, now what am I going to do about this? And finally I realized I had to do something. When the herd was right in front of me, they hadn't seen me or smelled me, the wind was in the wrong direction. I said, well, I'll do the one thing that humans can do in this situation. And I stood up. I stood up, and the lead cow just kind of wigged out like this, and the whole herd was pressing up behind her. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know I was there because I'd been down. And I held out my arms like this. Every human being will do this. This is human. It's called the wall stance. I'm here. You can't go through me. She reared up on her rear legs. They're huge, these things. Her eyes rolling out of her head. And for a minute there, I thought she was going to literally run right through me, and there would be nothing that I could do about it. But she ended up turning to the side and blasted through the woods, and all the other elk followed her, and they were, you know, dirt flying in the air and everything. They were right next to me. It was like being next to a buffalo stampede, only it was elk, an entire herd of elk. It was like that. And that was one of those times when I thought, this is not the sort of thing that most people experience, you know. I was like, whoa. And for the whole rest of the afternoon, I could hear the elk all over the mountain because they just ran in every direction, kind of slowly coming back together and putting the herd back together again and moving up to the higher meadow. And all of them, I'm certain, were breathing as hard as I was. But my God, that was astonishing. I had never thought there'd be a time when elk might stampede me. And thank God that cow made the right decision. I forgot to mention that I stood up like this, and she kind of reared back, and I could see on her face that she was asking herself, he doesn't look that big, I could probably just go through him. When I was in graduate school, I lived in downtown Portland, and I rode my bike through downtown Portland every day. And I learned what they call the biker's whistle. Have you heard of this? It's used to get attention because we don't have horns. And it's especially used when there are overly aggressive drivers to try to push them back. And let me see if I can still do it.
Wow.
It's a little bit like that. And that's what I did. It's all I could think of. It just came to me from my 20s. I did the biker's whistle, and it worked. She kind of went, oh, maybe not. Maybe I won't go through this one. That's what it does with drivers too. Maybe I can't drive through this guy. And she turned and ran off. But yeah, that and the dysentery were the two moments when I was frightened for my well-being.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
And what was the dysentery? Actually, how were you treating your water?
Well, that's the problem. I wasn't treating. I was drinking rainwater, which is fine, and I knew better than this. I knew yards better than this. I was just being an idiot. I was continuing to drink rainwater out of the same buckets all the time, even after plant life started growing on the side of the bucket, you know, and I could see, and I had filters. I just wasn't filtering my water, and so I ended up getting dysentery from that. And then I spent a couple of days trying to hide from that, which is difficult to hide from something that's in your intestines. And finally I got mad at myself, and I said, look, Rob, you've been studying wild edibles your whole life. You wrote a freaking book about this, and in the book you told people how to cure dysentery. Now get off your butt and do it. So then I was charged up, and then for the next couple of weeks I was very much devoted to these remedies that I was putting together that tasted awful, but they worked. I went out and gathered all the stuff that I know is good for you when you've got dysentery, and I invented this tea that is truly revolting. And I drank it several times a day, and I ate certain herbs that I knew were good for you, like Douglas fir needles are good to kind of tighten you up if you've got diarrhea. and that kind of thing. I ate a lot of stuff that I know is full of vitamin C, like sorrel, the sorrel that grows on the forest floor. I ate that. A lot of blackberry rhizome. That was the stuff that tastes terrible. The blackberry rhizome that I ate, and I put spruce needles in the tea. And anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I did, and I shook it. But it took me a couple of days to man up.
So you're doing this for weeks?
It took me a good month to really be completely free of it. I was free of the night sprints, where I got out of, I'm in this little backpacking tent, so you have to unzip and you have to run out, and it's pitch black, and you're literally in the middle of the woods, and with the coyotes and the cougars and the raccoons and everything else, and to say nothing of all the things you're going to trip over. And at this point, forget the sandals, I'm barefoot, and you're trying to run as far from the tent as you can get before it all comes to grief, and that lasted a week. And I ended up digging a trench and making a little like bathroom area behind the tent, clearing all the branches and things that I might trip over so I could make that run. And that lasted for a week. And then after that, the symptoms slowly receded. And I also had I was on a real emotional roller coaster. Dysentery will do that to you too. In my journal during that period, there are lines where I write something like, boy, the sunrise this morning was amazing. I am so lucky to be here. And the time's there, and the time's like, I don't know, 8 in the morning. And then you'll see my 9 in the morning entry. It's like, nothing's going well. I'm never going to be able to finish this. I'm going to have to leave. And then 9, it comes again. The rice this morning is delicious. This is the best thing. And it just all the way down like that. And because I was never reading my previous entries, when I read it now, I can really see what the dysentery was doing to where my head was. But I didn't realize that till I got home and went through my log again to write my book. And then I because I never read any of the previous entries, I just wrote a journal entry and put it away. I didn't realize that I was on that roller coaster.
That's interesting. That reminded me of another thing you mentioned, how the mind has effects on the physical body. Did you ever experience any manifestations of that?
You mean meditating?
Just kind of whatever was happening in your mind, your attitude, the way you were thinking, did that ever manifest in your body?
Yeah. By the time that I left, my whole body was full of aches and pains. I was way too old to do that. What I did mind-wise was that the aches and pains stopped being matters for great concern, especially if I knew what they were. If I had like the bursitis in my hips, it got to be just, all right, I've got bursitis in my hips. And when you do that, a lot of the problem with pain is the fear of pain. If you could feel pain and not be afraid of it, it wouldn't hurt nearly as much. And a lot of that was happening to me out there. It was just that I was living on a lot less food than I usually do out there, and feeling perfectly fine, although it alarmed the hell out of my friends when they visited me because I lost a lot of weight. But 2 bowls of rice and a bowl of Zanola every day was enough to keep me happy, except the first week. The first week I was incredibly hungry. One of the many things I learned was that, among other things, you need to bring treats for yourself. Not necessarily things you eat all the time. I wanted like chocolate bars to celebrate milestones. When I'd sat 25 of the 100 days, I wanted a chocolate bar to eat. And fortunately, my friends filled in that hole by the time that I left, and I had cocoa powder, and I had chocolate bars and granola bars. And my good friend Jack brought me a beer, a microbrew, because he knows I like that. One of the that comes in the big bottle. And I think it was like day 60, and it knocked me on my can. But my system was running so clean out there, because my diet was perfectly clean, that just the alcohol, forget that. I had another friend who was coming home from camping and stopped to do a proof of life. And she had a cooler full of stuff that she just left with me. And she had like some wine coolers. And one of those knocked me on my can. And I remember writing in my journal, I said, I've been out here so long and my engine is running so clean that a chick drink knocked me on my ass. you know? And that was something I didn't realize, that if you don't put those kind of poisons in your body will forget how to metabolize them. And forget beer. The same friend who brought the beer brought me a tray of strawberries, fresh strawberries, and I swear to God, it was like acid. I put these things in my mouth and they sizzled. And I'd swallow them and it was... You're too young to remember the 60s, but man, the kind of things we used to see in TV shows and movies in the 60s, that's exactly what it was like. It was like, because my body was just not used to anything that wasn't rice and beans or zanola. And by the way, I loved all of that. That was all amazing. That was all amazing stuff that I was really glad to experience. And so you don't have to drop acid, just put yourself on rice and beans for 100 days and eat fresh fruit. And whoa, I have a very, very fond memory of that.
We had an interesting relationship with food, I guess, too, in a completely different way. Just because on the trail, part of it is you're burning so many calories so that you can never eat enough food, but we're also eating junk food, just like crap, all day.
Right. Well, especially when you're moving, when you're hiking a lot, your body wants sugar, it wants that kind of stuff. Yeah. The only sugar that I got, aside from the wild fruit that I picked around the acres, which was another thing. When I came to a fruiting bush, I just stopped and just ate. I mean, I ended up swallowing leaves. I was eating so fast because I wasn't getting that kind of stuff. But aside from that, it was the dried fruit and the zanola in the morning. And sometimes when I was particularly needing a boost mentally, I would just take my zanola bag and pull out the fruit and just eat the fruit out of it. And sometimes to treat myself, I just have a bowl of zanola like at 10 in the evening because I needed something to feel better. But I like living a life where little things like that are sufficient. I like having a life where I can have a bowl of oatmeal and dried fruit. And to me, that's the equivalent of cake. That's the most delicious cake you've ever had. Something about that really makes me feel good about living that way. I get the same boost the rest of you have to get by spending $100 a plate in a restaurant. And it's rice and beans. Fabulous. Mm-hmm. I never disliked my rice and beans the whole time I was out there. There was never a time that mealtime came and I thought, rice and beans again. That never happened. I did have I had a rule that I wouldn't allow myself to think about food. And sometimes I had to invoke that rule. There were certain things I was dying for. Pancakes. I really wanted pancakes. I really wanted popcorn. And part of that is because the brown jasmine rice I was eating smells like popcorn when it cooks, which is really cruel. I wanted pizza. I wanted eggs. I was dying for eggs. But whenever that came up, whenever the thoughts came up, I would do that Zen thing and let them go away because I know that there lies madness if you don't have access to that kind of food. But there was never a time when I was eating my rice and beans and thought, I wish this was pizza. That never happened. The rice and beans were always perfectly good enough for me. One of my friends came out and brought me a tomato, and I was going to slice it up and put it in a salad or a sandwich because they also brought me bread. I can't remember what. Anyway, I was going to slice it, and I was slicing this tomato, and while I was slicing, I thought I would take the first slice and just eat it. Boom! Tomato was gone. That's exactly what happened. It was just like I took the one slice off, and then I had a few more slices, and they were just gone. It was just gone that fast. But I don't mind that. I mean, I don't even really consider that a lapse of discipline. That was the right thing to do at that time.
That's interesting because we definitely hated our food on the trail.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were times when our dinner, we were eating a lot of rice and ramen for dinner. We did that for probably half the hike. Mm-hmm. And around half the hike, that's when we had to change things up because we just couldn't stomach it anymore.
Yeah, ramen is one of my big go-tos in the outback when I'm hiking and whatnot. Yeah. I usually load it up with whatever else I have and eat that. Yeah, and I remember my brother and I went hiking once when we were in our 20s, and we had a breakfast one time of pepperoni and Hershey bars. I remember that. Washed down with Tang. washed down with tang. Yeah.
Sounds good.
But you know, hunger does wonders for your appetite and for your enjoyment of your food. And I'm sure that one of the reasons why the rice and beans were so pleasing to me was that I was famished. But my senses, when you meditate, your senses become incredibly sharp. Like when I meditate at home in the morning, I can smell the dinner that I made last night still in the air when I meditate. And the same thing with my hearing, all that stuff becomes very, very acute. And so part of it is that living on so much meditation, I was really tasting that food in a way that, like, I still eat a lot of rice and beans. I have rice, brown rice, at least once a day, even now, and some days it's all I eat. And I don't enjoy it as much as I did out there. I have to put more in it. I have to put salted peanuts, or, you know, sriracha sauce is my go-to. You know, and out there, I had sriracha out there too, but mostly it was just that my senses were so incredibly sharp that it really did taste better.
That makes sense.
The sun was warmer out there, and when it was cold, it was colder, and everything was, the smoke from the fire, there was a wood stove in the barn, blessing from God, that I used to heat bath water and stuff on one day a week. I told you, one day a week I went down to replenish my supplies and bathe. They're called barn days. And it was so cold. By God, it was cold that summer. It was like this all summer long. And I don't know if I'd ever bathed if it hadn't been for that wood stove. And I'd put a fire in there, and I could smell the different kinds of wood I was burning. You know, so.
Did you have a coyote story?
I got several coyote stories. Soon after I made camp, I woke up one morning. You're hearing them howling around you in the woods all the time. I woke up one morning and there was a coyote turd this far from my head. While I'd been asleep, a coyote had pooped right outside the tent, that close to my head. And you know they know you're in there. He did that on purpose. The coyotes use their dumps as a way of declaring territory. And so I would very occasionally leave one of my dumps above ground when I was there, just to let them know that I wasn't going anywhere. You know, I was never anywhere near where I was going to be, because human feces are really revolting. But occasionally, and they would dig up my piles. They would dig up my piles to smell them and see what was going on. I also had a store of beef jerky that I brought with me for the sole purpose of putting cougars on notice, so that when they smelled my pile, they would be able to smell. Cougars have very sensitive noses, and they can smell that A, you're eating meat, and B, it's large, whatever it is that you're eating, and probably even C, it runs in a herd. And that's what I wanted to have happen. I wanted the cougars to smell my poop and say, we better leave this one alone. He doesn't look that dangerous, but he's eating something big, so, you know. But anyway, yeah, one night I was asleep, and the coyotes on the ridge above me, well, to begin with, I should tell you, I could tell when they'd had pups, because at night when they howled, you could hear the pups going yip, yip, yip too. And one night, they all started howling. Coyotes are into jazz. Jazz is what they're doing. They howl for the fun of it, and it's very jazzy, it really is. And they howled like in perfect harmony. They had this chord going that was absolutely amazing. And then suddenly, all at once, they were just off. It was like a conductor had cut them off. And the funniest thing was, after a couple of beats, there was one single yip. That was it. And it was like one of them was going, damn, people, because that was good. I mean, it was really, really good. And I could hear the coyotes talk to each other on the successive ridges. I was between two ridges. So they'd start on this ridge, and then this clan would start, and then down the hill a ways, you'd hear another one, and another one, and another one off into the distance until you just couldn't hear them anymore. That was astonishing. That was really, the owls were like that too. I had owls all around all the time. And the rain owls, which were the main owls, there were like 7 different owls there, but the rain owls were the main owls on the property. They did the same thing. They'd call, and you'd hear another one call, and another one, and another one, and another one, until you couldn't hear them anymore. I had a barn owl that would perch right above my meditation shelter at night, like midnight. So I'd be there sitting. Have you ever heard the mating call of a barn owl?
I don't believe so.
Look it up. You can find them like on YouTube. It is frightening. It's this horror movie sound. It's a hiss that's really, really, really loud. And this guy would sit on the branch 3 feet above my meditation shelter, which was just a piece of Tyvek. And I was underneath sitting there, and this god-awful noise would happen. And I know he was doing it on purpose, because barn owls follow 2 rules. They're never anywhere but in a barn or similar structure. And the other rule is they're never afoot during the day. Well, this wasn't day, but he left either our barn or some other barn to sit there and scream like this, and it was absolutely chilling. The most chilling sound in the world. Usually it was the rain owls doing that to me, but this was the barn owl.
That's awesome. I think I'm out of questions. Anything else? Anything else you want to say?
I think I've told you just about everything that there is to know. And when my book comes out, you can read that and fill in any of the gaps. In my book, I talk a little bit about some of the crazy dreams I had, and some of that stuff, and some of the mishaps I had. And the big thing I had was a lot of near mishaps. That's where the mindfulness saved my rear end so many times. If I tried that right now, if I got up and drove back there and drove around there, I'd be dead, because I don't have the mindfulness now that I had at the time. I almost twice fell into deep holes that would have probably broken both my legs and killed me. One of them was a shot into a river, and the only reason that it didn't happen was because I was in sandals, and I was feeling my way along with my walking stick, and I reached a point where my walking stick wasn't touching earth anymore. And I went, what the hell is this? What is this? There was a hook on the other end of my monk stick, so I turned it around and pulled the weeds away. There was a freaking well there. In one case, it was an actual well that a human being had dug, and it had just gotten grown over, and it was in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. I would have plunged right into that thing, and that would have been it for me, The other one was a naturally occurring hole in the bank next to the river. It was probably, 6 feet deep. I'd have gotten into mud up to my chest. That'd have been it for me. So I had several mishaps like that didn't happen because I was moving very slowly, because I was wearing sandals, and I was just very mindful. I was very, very aware.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, this was great fun.
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, where you'll find a lot of videos that have similar themes.